Hi everyone, welcome to Community Connections. This is an offshoot of the Upfront show that was on Shaw, and we're in downtown Castlegar at the Humble Bean, and today we're going to be interviewing Katrine Conroy. Very excited about that. Hi, we're at the Humble Bean in downtown Castlegar, and I'm with MLA Katrine Conroy of Kootenay West. And I got to tell you, Katrine, this is a pleasure. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Lots going on. So to start things off, let's talk a little bit about COVID. So your government has followed science all the way through. Dr. Henry has been the spokesperson. Good move, really good move. How do you guys win this? 2 years ago, everybody was rallying, masks, isolate, vaccine. And now it's, why are you taking our masks away when actually you've given us choice, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So can you explain a little bit to the public why you're giving people choice now?
Okay, and it is great to see you, Deb, and it's wonderful to be in a room without a mask on, even though I do wear a mask whenever I go into bigger stores and stuff still, just to be safe. And it is a tough one because we have been following science, we have been listening to Dr. Bonnie Henry. You're right, she has been the spokesperson on this because she is the scientist, she is the expert, she knows this, she's an epidemiology expert. I mean, she gets this. So no decisions were made without advice from her, like how we move forward. Over 93% of the people in the province have had their first vaccination, and 91% have had their second, and almost 60% have had their booster. So there is the numbers are going down, hospital numbers are going down, deaths are going down. So it showed that we could move forward, and we're leaving the choice to people as well. If they still want to wear masks, they can. If they still, if they want to, clean their hands all the time with hand sanitizer, that's their choice. I think I will keep wearing masks in public. I mean, we saw last fall the low rate of influenza, that like hardly anybody got the flu. So when we come into those seasons where people are going to be worried about the flu, I think it showed that wearing a mask is going to help you not get the flu, things like that. But we went with science. We went with Dr. Bonnie Henry, and I think it was the Premier's choice to not put himself front and center. He said, I'm not the expert here, I'm the Premier of the province, I am not an expert in this. We need to have people listening to Dr. Bonnie Henry. So it was her and our Minister of Health, Adrian Dix, who were the spokespeople. And I think they did a great job, and we're ready to move forward to the next phase. And it's, you're running into people, and people are saying it's so nice to be able to sit and talk. It's so nice to see smiles. I hear that a lot in stores. Nice to see smiles again. But it's what people are comfortable with, and we need to keep moving forward. It's been a tough few years for people, but it's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, it has been really tough, and I think now that the government had been so good at giving us direction, that now when it comes to our own choice, it's like, oh my God, now what do we do?
What do you do?
Right? And I think it'll come to pass that masks will probably be worn a lot still, I would
Probably.
think. Yeah.
And I also take my cue from if people that are when I walk into a business, if they're wearing masks, I'm going to wear masks out of respect for them.
Right. Yeah, common sense approach. Yeah. It was funny because you read the media now, and they flipped, from yay heroes to what are you doing? Yeah. And it's a tough road, and I commend you guys on doing such a good job in keeping BC safe, because really BC stood out amongst everyone else as doing an awesome job and putting people first before politics. So thank you for that.
Thank you. No.
So the other thing is housing. And I have a few questions from the public that I'll ask later. Okay. But housing is a huge issue, or lack thereof. Rental housing, affordable housing, low-income housing. And how do we navigate that as a province? It's a costly venture, especially for low-income housing, government-sourced housing, and there's going to be a fight for every dollar. How do you reconcile that as to some get, some do not? I mean, the focus will be on the coast, of course, because that's where the majority of the people are. But what about us here? I mean, some communities are doing really well.
And some communities have, and in my constituency alone, there's been well over like 130 new housing starts and that have been funded, you know, in partnership with the government, with BC Housing. We're looking at municipalities to also step up because there's issues around, you know, costs when it comes to the, you know, developing the development costs. There's, you know, costs on the property, and if we can work with the municipality, we can move even quicker, and we have been doing that. I also want to commend the Columbia Basin Trust. I mean, I am the minister responsible, but I don't make the day-to-day decisions. Those are decisions made by the trust, made by the plan, the annual plans that are done, and they have entered into partnership with government, with communities, to enable us to be able to open up even more housing in the Columbia Basin. And we are moving ahead. Like it's, there was very little housing built in the, you know, prior to us becoming government, and so we're doing a lot of catch up. We've had two ministers, first Selena Robinson, who's now Minister of Finance, and now the Attorney General, David Eby, is responsible for housing, and they are working full out to ensure that we can, you know, try to make housing more affordable, to ensure that it's not only for people that, you know, low income people, but also for people that, you know, middle income people who are trying to find housing. And I mean, even in our community here, you know, I had a nephew that was trying to buy a house, and every time he'd put the bid in, he'd put the maximum bid in, and people would come in and bid up, you know, and it was far more than what it was originally put out to, you know, at worth. So, you know, so that was a tough one. He did get a house finally, thank goodness, and he's very happy. Yeah, so I mean, it's an issue, and we're going to have to keep working on it. There's, I mean, we've brought in some of the guidelines around in some of the other communities, and like in the Lower Mainland, if you have two homes, if you're not living in both of them, then you're going to get charged a little more taxes. A lot of those houses now are being rented out.
Good.
So it worked. People are recognizing, like, do I really need two houses? Do I need to rent it out? And if they're not utilizing it, you know, so people will buy it as a investment and then don't want to rent it out, but now they are, which is creating some real opportunities. And we are doing everything we can to ensure that we're going to work with communities, and that's one thing that the minister is trying not to do. He's trying not to tell communities that you have to do this, this, and this, but in some situations he's had to step in because there's been homeless people who are going to be thrown out of shelters in the winter, and we can't have that. You know, we got to work together with municipalities. All levels of government have to work together.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions that was asked, is that when it comes to housing and zoning and all that stuff, the municipalities have to follow the provincial guidelines. In some instances.
Some guidelines are municipal.
Yeah. So will the province be working then with municipalities to fast track some stuff, or to change policy so it's not so onerous to get something done?
So
with proper consultation.
With proper, yeah, and we're and recognizing that municipalities are different. That you know, some municipalities are welcoming with open arms. Please come in and help us. We need, and there's different kinds of housing. Like some people need, you know, housing for low income, some middle income, some rental. Like it's just we need more rental in our community. Some, you know, resort communities need employee housing, which is, you know, because we need people to work in the communities. They need more employee housing, and then there's also things like supported housing, making sure that we have the supports in place for people who might have, you know, drug and alcohol issues, might have mental health issues, that need that level of extra support with that, you know, supported care, you know, continuing care. So we're looking at different ways of making sure that we can provide those different levels of housing across the province. But it's working with municipalities, it's working with also Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, to make sure that we can provide all those other supports. Yeah.
So a collaborative approach on.
Definitely.
Yeah, always works.
Yeah, I mean, we can't sit there in Victoria and say, okay, you have to do this, this, and this, when communities are saying, no, we don't want to. But you know, we have to work together.
Yeah.
And
sometimes I wish you would.
Well, I get that,
Yeah.
but and it is working for the most part. It has worked really, really well, and I've seen some of the new housing and for seniors, for low-income people, and just talked to one. I was in Kimberley just before COVID. It seems like it was not that long ago, but it was now when I think about it. But we just opened up a housing place in Kimberley, and this one young woman said, I've been in horrible housing situations with her 2 kids, and now she has this beautiful place, and she couldn't believe it. And she just said, I never thought this would happen.
Yeah.
So, and that was a collaboration with the trust, with government, with the municipality, and it all worked. So, and in nonprofit society.
Yeah,
so,
and
yeah.
the trust is really, really.
They've stepped up.
Oh man, have they ever, eh? Yeah.
They recognize the need in this region, and the trust has always been there to not, take over for government, but they recognize how they could work with government, with the provincial government, and that collaboration together has been incredible. So
Yeah, they've done a great job.
Yeah.
There's other things going on that are big in the province and across Canada, across nations, and that is the opioid crisis. Many, many, many have died and will continue to die.
Yeah.
And they don't have to. The majority,
Yeah.
it could be different for them.
Yeah.
So what is your government planning in the next while to help eradicate that, to lessen the death?
And it's been really tough. When we formed government, it was the first time ever the Premier brought in a Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. Never happened in the government anywhere in Canada, and now the federal government has matched that. There isn't actually an equivalent minister to work with the minister now, the existing minister. And we were actually making headway. The numbers of deaths were going down, the issues with the drug supply, but when COVID hit, the numbers started going back up. The drug supply became extremely toxic, far more toxic than it had ever been. People were using alone, and that's the biggest issue. People have this in their mindset of people in the downtown east side that are drug addicts that are dying because of it. That's not necessarily the case. A lot of the people that are dying are people that live by themselves. A lot have good jobs, can't access what they would like to access in a healthy way, and they're getting a toxic drug source that kills them, and they're alone. So they don't have somebody there that can help them with naloxone and something like that. So more and more people have died since COVID than we had thought. So now that there's the opportunity that we can start to work again around the toxic drug supply. We can start to work again around, encouraging people, do not use alone. If you're going to use, have a friend. If so that if at least somebody that understands how to use naloxone, being able to give out more naloxone kits, but also looking at the drug supply. How can we stop that toxic drug supply, and looking at decriminalization of certain drugs. We've asked the that's a federal government issue, so we've asked them to come on board with us, to work with us, so that we can look at ways of ensuring that people are getting the supports they need.
Right.
Yeah.
Complex issue, for sure.
Very
Not
complex.
easy.
No.
Yeah. We're going to take a really short break, and then we're going to come back with Katrine Conroy, MLA for Kootenay West. So it's interesting, I put out on Facebook that I was going to be talking to you, and the first 5 things that popped up was, I would like to know when we are scrapping time change. Seems to be the big issue. Hey, I don't mind it, I change my car, I change my one clock.
Yeah.
Everything else is automatic.
Yeah.
But it's a big issue for people.
It is in fact, when we did the referendum, over 93% responded and said that they wanted to stay on daylight savings time, which we were surprised at that number. The Premier Horgan said no, he thought it was going to be a big number. He was right. And so we've been looking into it, and one of the issues for us is to be on the same time zone as our neighbors to the south because of, especially because of economic issues. There's a lot of trade, a lot of work that's done with them, and recreation as well. So Premier Horgan's been having the discussions with the Governor Ensley from Washington particularly, and has had some of the other discussions with the governors of Oregon and California. But so they agree, and it has actually gone to the Congress. And the Congress has given those 3 states the permission to move ahead with that, but now it has to go to the Senate. So once the Senate makes that decision, they can move ahead with it, and we can all move ahead together. So it's we'll see what happens. It's a congressional decision that has to be made in Washington, D.C., and we'll see what happens. But it would have been really difficult for businesses, for the economy to, especially during COVID, to make changes like that. So hopefully this potentially could be the last time for those people that are, I'm not crazy about spring forward. I love fall back, but get an extra hour's sleep. But yeah, but we'll see. I mean, if it's all the same, then it'll just be the same. The only thing is the darker mornings in the winter will be hard for people, but yeah.
I'm a creature of habit. I like to stay with the way things are. I like the fall back. I like the spring forward. I don't know, maybe it's sad, but I look forward to it. Talks about how quiet my life is now.
We've been raised on that for years.
Yeah, it's
so,
just what we know,
yeah,
right?
it's what we know. But there's so many people that, it was interesting that we got
it's a
that.
high number.
High number. Yes, very high. One of the highest numbers that we've had input on from across the province, from all across the province.
Yeah, there's financial implications. There's going to be a lot of things that will have to change to tie everything in.
Yeah, that's one of the issues, and some of it will change slowly, and some of it will change quicker. So yeah.
So social media. What a bear, eh?
I do very little social media, Deb. I do very little. When I was Minister of Children and Families, my grandkids, I got 9 grandkids, so most of them were on my social media, and what I was getting was so negative. I just said I have a social media that that as a MLA and as a minister, but I do not do social media anymore. Yeah. And it got even worse with my new ministry.
Yeah, it's very sad that people have taken to social media to be mean and destructive.
Yeah, and they have anonymity. They don't, it's not like in the days when people used to write a letter and actually put some thought into it and actually thought about it before they mailed it. Now it's just you hit send and you can say whatever you want and be as vile as you want. You can be constructive too, which is great. When you do get those constructive input from people is really good. But the nastiness of it is really disconcerting, and I worry about it. It's it's not a great thing in some day.
It's a useful tool when used properly.
Yeah, very useful.
Yeah, it's sad that people have been emboldened. We have seen that BC has the highest rate of was it hate crimes or
racism, hate crimes. In fact, I had I just did a tour and left Castlegar and went through along 3 and then up to Vernon last week, and we stopped in and visited with some counselors along the way, and a number of them said to me, we're not sure if we're going to run, and we're not sure who's going to run, just because especially in small communities. Ed and I used to joke that we'd go shopping and we'd start at one end of the store, and by the time I got to the other end, he'd finally catch up with me, and now it's me doing that. Because people know you and they want to have a chat with you and talk about things, and now there's that added part that's just a little disconcerting. I mean, I've had people threatening to come and protest at my home, for instance. I live with my granddaughter, and I'm just like, that's just not on. I mean, to me, it's threatening my family.
Absolutely.
And because you put yourself out in the public, your family shouldn't be threatened. If you've got issues, talk to me. But don't, leave my family out of it. Leave my, it's just, and It emboldens people.
It does.
It's
And
worrisome.
what do you think, like, how did it happen that BC, because as far as I can remember, BC has kind of been a live, love, and welcome immigrants, and let's bring people here, and, you know, kumbaya, we love you all, to this, you know, people pushing Asian people outdoors onto the street, and beatings and kicking, and it's something that I find really hard to wrap my head around, because
I
that's...
think it's part of it is what happened in the States under the previous president, who seemed to encourage that, and people seem to think that that's the thing to do. And it's, you know, I don't think it is. I want to be back to where we are the people that embrace people, that we bring people in and we support people and work together in a way that's really positive. And it's okay, you know, to disagree with people. It's okay to, you know, to do those lawful, peaceful protests. That's okay. You know, that's what we're all about. But when you start to bring in that you know, nastiness, and it's not good.
Yeah, and that's the fear that everyone has when we start hearing about the convoy heading towards the Victoria, and
That got stopped.
yeah, and all the ugliness that can come of it. I mean, keep your message clear. Peaceful protest.
Yeah.
Those that want to listen will listen.
Yeah.
The government's moving in the direction that they want anyway.
Yes.
And then there's, of course, you guys are being blamed for high gas prices. So they have a convoy driving to protest high gas prices, which
I don't understand.
befuddles my head,
Just
because
befuddles
it's
mine. Well, the same as, you know, they're protesting high gas, and then they can't park in front of the legislature. Now they can't even get down there. But when we were down there a couple of weeks ago, they were driving around the legislature, and they couldn't park because they weren't allowed to. But yet, I'm thinking, how much gas is that costing you? Like, what kind of job do you have that you can afford that? Because it's, you know, you got to have a good one. Gas is expensive way more down Victoria than it is here.
yeah.
So yeah.
And I think Horgan's message has been clear. Get a new hobby.
Yeah.
You know, protest in ways that you know, and on issues that can be dealt with, I think, you know.
Well, they you know, cut some taxes in Alberta, and the next day gas prices went up to make up the difference, and it goes into the pockets of gas companies. It does not go into people that are buying the gas. It doesn't help us.
Yeah, and
You know, we
guys
know
aren't
that.
rolling in the dough because of it. It's
No,
not
we're
like you have a
not.
separate account for higher gas prices.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be nice if you could help
Would not
us,
be
eh?
nice. No,
Yeah,
we don't.
It's funny how we can misinterpret things, right? Yeah. So there is a question here that, and I'll just have to pull it up here, that I was asked to ask you about the forestry. So, and this was a question from a fellow on Facebook. So he says, as you know, forestry has been an economic driver, providing well-paying direct jobs and spin-off employment for Castlegar and the surrounding area for many years. The recent announcements from your ministry protecting old-growth forests throughout the province is sure to have an economic impact on the areas of the province. Can you tell us what amount of timber will be saved under the new legislation in the West Kootenays, and how it may impact forest companies operating in our region? It's a mouthful.
That's a mouthful. And then there's a bunch of different issues there, because we've brought in two different pieces of legislation that actually had nothing to do with old growth, and then we brought in the old growth. We accepted all 14 recommendations from the old growth strategic review. And that review was done in 2019, and we got it in 2020, and we started to implement the report in 2020. It was unanimous in the House. Everybody agreed with the recommendations, all 14 of them. But what has to be, what I need to make sure that I'm very clear is the report that was done by two well-respected foresters, and they went across the province. They talked to hundreds and thousands of people. They got input. They did a lot of research. There was never a moratorium on old growth. So we're not going to absolutely stop cutting all old growth in this province. What we are looking at is the old growth that is at risk for biodiversity, for loss of the biodiversity, that are at risk of that, the risk of losing that biodiversity. So we want, like, we're looking at the rare and the we call it remnant, the very old trees that are good for carbon sequestration, things like that. So there still will be old growth cut in this province. What we're also doing is we recognize a change to the forestry is that we need to support and work with Indigenous nations in this province. The forests are on their traditional territory, and they've gotten very little benefit out of that. So we have said we need to work with those Indigenous nations. So what we're doing is we're having discussions with Indigenous nations about the old growth on their traditional territories. We had a technical advisory panel made up of experts, people who've been doing research on old growth for years. They've got doctorates. They are experts in the field. They have worked with First Nations, with government, with municipalities, with environmental groups across the province, and with industry. And they recommended certain areas of the province where the old growth should be deferred. And when we say deferred, we're talking deferred for 2 years. So during that 2-year period, we will work with Indigenous nations. We will work with industry. We will work with communities, and we'll say, this area needs to be deferred. What will we do? We've also in the last budget, we have over $100 million to support communities if we have to look at, if there's impacts to communities, to support workers, to make sure that we are looking at, with workers, we're looking at a program that we brought in a couple of years ago when there was a downturn in the forest industry. It was a bridging to retirement. Hundreds of people came forward and said they were ready to bridge to retirement, let the younger people keep working. And so they got the support to do that. So we've reinstated that, and we've already been inundated with that. It's a big draw for people. So we're also looking at what can we do with communities, working with communities. We're looking at training for people that work in the forest industry, and if not only for if there's a partner that works in the forest industry but has a spouse that maybe he or she wants to work in the like be a nurse, for instance, or go into the medical field or do something because they want to stay in their community. The training could be for either the person that worked in the forest industry or for the spouse, for their partner. So we're looking at creative ways of working together, because we can't keep doing what we're doing in this province. Like, I look at what's happening with the forest industry, and what we can't just keep cutting the trees down without looking at the whole ecosystem. We can't just look at trees as commodities. We have to look at the entire forest. We have to say, we have to look at that ecosystem. We have to look at the critters, the wildlife, because we're getting lots of feedback on the wildlife. We have to look at what can we do to make the forest sustainable, because we want to make sure that we have a forest industry that's here for people today, but also that's here for generations to come. I mean, I like to say of my 9 grandkids, I want to make sure that if they want to work in the forest industry, the youngest right now is 5 or 6. She's 6. Oh my God, she's 6. So we want to make sure she can work in the forest industry if she wants to, just like her dad, and like her mom did too. But also, if they want to walk in the forest and go and see old growth forests, that they have the ability to do that. And we have to make sure they do that. In fact, this last summer, our oldest granddaughter worked in the pulp mill. She's 4th generation in our family to work in the pulp mill, which I think is pretty cool. And I want her kids, if she ends up having kids here, to be able to work in the pulp mill too, if they are so inclined. Yeah. And we have to be looking at it as we want a sustainable forest industry. We don't want to just see, okay, we got to cut all the trees down because it's good for the economy. Well, it's not. We got to make sure we're planting trees. We've planted over 300 million trees every year for the past 3 years. We're at almost at $1 billion. The federal government wants to do a billion trees by X number, and we're already there. Like, we are doing it because we recognize how critical it is. So we are making changes. We're making changes so people in communities have more say on what happens with a cut block. When people are going to go in and do harvesting, that we have to, they have to look at the watersheds. They have to look at what's happening there. So people in a community will have more say. Indigenous nations will have more say. But ultimately, that we will have a forest industry for communities and for workers, because that's what's critical. The actual numbers, whoever asked the question asked for numbers in this area. We are having those discussions with First Nations right now. So the numbers for this area haven't been decided yet, but there is old growth in our area. People don't think of it, but there's trees in the interior. They're about 150 to 200 years old. On the lower mainland, they're 250 to plus years old. And in the lower mainland, you see those big, huge trees. We don't have old growth like that here. They're smaller, but they're old.
Yeah.
And they're just as important. We have a beautiful Incompaloo Valley up north in the cusp that has incredible, they compare it to the movie Avatar, how beautiful that area is, So we're talking to industry, we're talking to workers, we're talking to communities about, and particularly, we're going to be talking to the Indigenous nations. We've reached out to all 204 nations in this province. 7 don't have any old growth in their area. 5 have not been able to make a decision with us because they have had issues with flooding, with fires, with COVID. And then we have a number of nations who don't want to defer. They feel they've already done enough deferrals in their traditional territories. Great Bear Rainforest is a great example of that up on the coast. There's a lot of old growth up there. They have a really well-managed plan, a forest landscape plan that the Indigenous nations have done with industry, with environmentalists, and they have done quite a bit already. And so they said we're on the right track here. We just entered into a partnership with Nanawakolis. It's a group of a coalition of nations from the island and Western Forest Products, and they did mitigation, so there won't be any job loss.
That's great.
So it's. Sorry, I get going on this. I'm pretty passionate about it. I'm excited about it because it's important for people to know. Like forestry for me, I grew up because I'm from a forestry family. There is going to be forestry in this province for years to come. And it has to be sustainable, and we have to make sure that it's done right. And we're going to do that. And I don't want to be sitting somewhere 10 years from now and have someone complaining about me because we didn't do what we needed to do. And it's kind of exciting. As of April 1st, I'm not going to be Minister of Forest, Lands, Natural Resources and Rural Development anymore. I'm going to be Minister of Forests. We're dividing the ministry into 2. And Josie Osborne, the former mayor of Tofino, will be the new minister for lands, water, and natural resources. And it's great because we're going to be working together very closely, and it's an opportunity to make sure that we've got more boots on the ground to do the work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, a half hour goes by really quickly.
Oh my gosh, yes.
We do have to wrap this up, but I want to tell you that I truly appreciate you coming here and speaking with us today. This is one community connection that I think is very, very, it's needed by the community just to have these conversations in an informal setting and just being able to chat. So I thank you very much. Keep up the good work. Thank you for keeping us safe. And I hope to talk to you again really soon.
Well, just ask me and I'll be here. This is great lot.
Yes,
Great
thank you, Humble
coffee
Bean.
from Humble
Yes.
Bean, yeah. So, no, this is great. Thank you so much, Deb. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Katrine.
it. Yeah.
Great.